Chapter 37 of Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger, A Story of Frontier Reform. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger, A Story of Frontier Reform by Albert Bigelow Paine. The Conduit Mystery Solved. Captain Bill as a sleuth. The telltale handprint. A ranger captain's theories established. Captain McDonald realized that his task in Edna was to be a hard one, made harder by the fact that the citizens of Edna still bitterly opposed his investigation, still believed that his chief purpose was to cheat them of Monk Gibson's life. There was one important exception to this opposition. Sheriff Egg of Edna, though with little faith in the ranger captain's theories, volunteered to help test them, and his assistance was valuable. Another favorable condition for his work was that certain of the suspected Negroes had fallen out among themselves, and he presently discovered that there were strange insinuations and implied charges drifting about the settlement which might mean much or nothing at all. Felix Powell had been arrested for knocking down his sister-in-law, Warren Powell's wife, and was working out his time on the road, when Captain McDonald returned to Edna. The ranger captain gave the disturbed elements a little judicious stirring, and they fomented. "If I told all I know about that nigger, he'd hang for murder," Irene Powell blurted out. Detective McDonald smiled quietly, but did not use undue haste. He had Felix Powell removed from the public highways and once more put in jail. Then quietly he went to the Negroes and made it easy, and even enticing, for them to talk. He knew the Negro character very well, its weaknesses and its animosities, and these he played on, gently, very gently, at first, but effectively. Little by little he learned that Felix had already been accused of the crime by those of his own color, some of whom were said to know the facts. He learned that Felix had been greatly exercised over the arrival of the first bloodhounds. "They'll trail a man to town," he had said, "but they can't follow a man that has oil on his shoes." All night he had lain awake, listening for the bay of the hounds. Once he had sat bolt upright in bed. "Here they come!" he had exclaimed to a man who was staying with him. Soon after he said, "I could put my hand on the man that committed that murder." And again, "There's one woman knows, and she may tell. As for Monk, he's told so many lies the white people won't believe him anyway." Two little children named Reed, looking at the bleeding legs of some tied chickens, said to each other that the bloody string reminded them of the clothes their mother had washed for Felix Powell. This was repeated and whispered, and one of Powell's acquaintances charged him with the crime. "They'll hang you for it, Felix," he said. "When they do, a lot of white folks will go to hell with me," was the reply. All these things came in due course to Captain Bill, and by, an affidavit for murder was prepared, and Powell was formally accused of the crime. When he knew of this, he became furious and attacked McDonald in his cell, and had to be overpowered and chained. Later, in a fit of rage, he snapped these chains and tore the shackles from his limbs. Then a heavier chain was put on him, and he was padlocked to the floor. Besides Felix Powell, charges were brought against Henry Howard and 4 women believed to be concerned in the killing, directly or as accessories to it, either before or after the fact. One of these, Augusta Diggs, on the second day of the examining trial, confessed her knowledge of the crime. She confirmed Captain Bill's belief that the murder of the Conduits had taken place in the morning, and declared that Powell had come to her with the story of how he and Monk Gibson had killed the Conduits, bringing his bloody clothes for her to wash. She had refused, and he had taken them elsewhere, to Bethel Reed. Other witnesses, willingly or unwillingly, gave further damaging evidence. Listeners began to wonder if there wasn't something in all these accusations besides a mere Negro feud, to suspect that perhaps Bill McDonald might be able to establish his theories, after all. But it is likely they would still have doubted, and the case would have come to naught, had there not been one more link in Captain Bill's chain of circumstance. He had been closely observing Felix Powell's right hand, when he could do so, without attracting the prisoner's attention, and mentally comparing it with the bloody print sought from the Condit's house. The print was a peculiar one. It showed an oblong spot for the thumb, a longer one for the forefinger, then two somewhat shorter ones for the middle and third finger, with a mere dot for the little finger. It was as if the hand had been maimed by accident and the fingers cut away. Captain Bill, at first, had made a sketch of the print, which he could surreptitiously compare with the hand of Powell, when opportunity offered. The comparison puzzled him. Powell's little finger might make the dot, for it had been deformed by a bone felon and had a crooked bone at the end. But his other fingers were normal, and it was hard to imagine they had made that bloody impress. Still, the ranger detective did not give up. He wanted to see the hand and the print together, or to see actual prints of the hand, by the side of telltale evidence left on the Conduit walls. Finally, one day, he got Felix Powell, whose diversions were few enough, interested in an experiment of camphor smoke paper upon which almost photographic reproductions of any yielding object could be made. The Negro was attracted by the results, and willingly enough made the impress of his open hand. Captain Bill felt a qualm of disappointment. Only the dot for the stub of a little finger compared at all with the print left by the murderer. Then suddenly he had an inspiration. He put an object the size of a closed knife into Felix's hand and told him to make a print with his fingers closed. The shadow of the gallows stretched out toward Felix Powell in that instant, but he did not know it. He pressed his hand to the paper, and as he lifted it, Bill McDonald's heart gave a fierce bound of triumph. The likeness to the print of blood was exact. As Captain Bill said afterward, I saw that Felix Powell's hand with a knife in it would fit the print left on the Conduit walls to a gnat's heel. Something of what was in his captor's mind must have filtered into the skull of Felix Powell then, for he became wary and frightened, and when Captain Bill urged him to make other prints, he moved his hand each time and blurred them. He was anxious, too, to know what use was going to be made of the ones already taken. When later he learned what had been done with them, and that his hand was identical with the bloody print found on the Conduit premises, he broke out in a rage. "Aren't there any other hand like that in the world?" he cried. There could be none. The tests of measurement and the similarity of line had been applied. They tallied exactly. They convinced Sheriff Egg completely. They convinced the most skeptical in Edna. When that examining trial ended, Captain Bill McDonald, ranger and detective, from being a man whose presence was resented and whose theories were despised, became suddenly, to the people of Edna, a mighty criminal sleuth. A veritable Sherlock Holmes, a hero whose name was on every tongue. Outside of Edna, Texas had suspected this before, but now Edna took the lead in singing his praises, and every paper in the state joined in the chorus. It is not within the purpose of this book to follow here the case of the Conduit murderers through the courts. The evidence, as finally accumulated, was voluminous and damning so far as Felix Powell and Monk Gibson were concerned. That Monk Gibson was a tool of Powell, and perhaps of others, was most likely, for it was proven that Powell had been seen walking around and around the field with him as he plowed, early on the morning of the murder, and the big track and the smaller one had been found there, side by side. That Powell had enticed the Negro boy to join in the crime, we may easily believe, and that Monk Gibson had joined in that fearful tragedy cannot be doubted, and he had plowed on until 1 o'clock, with those dead bodies lying there close by, thus giving his confederate, or confederates, a chance to establish an alibi, probably in accordance with a preconcerted plan. Both Powell and Gibson paid the extreme penalty of their crime. Powell went to the gallows at Victoria, Texas, on the 2nd of April, 1907. Monk Gibson was hanged in Cuero, Texas, a year later, in June. Neither made any confession that was of legal value, though Gibson, a few minutes before his execution, gave to Captain McDonald a rambling statement in which he involved others besides Powell. The cases of Henry Howard and of the women arrested as accessories to the plot and its execution had not been disposed of when this was written. Howard was then under indictment as principal and accessory on evidence supplied by McDonald. Whether that evidence is found sufficient to convict will only be decided by the juries of the future. End of chapter 37, read by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona, January 31st, 2022.